Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage from the Vault series. This is a series of interviews we did starting back in 2004, 2 years before the Musicians Hall of Fame opened to the public. We hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please remember to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Hope you enjoyed today's video with Don Felder.
I started playing guitar when I was 10 years old. I managed to trade a handful of cherry bombs to a kid across the street for an old beat-up guitar he had in his attic, and that's how I started. And there was really no formal education along the way. There were no music schools in town where I grew up. And I was just self-taught. I would listen to stuff on a record player or on a tape machine and slow it down to half speed so I could hear all the notes, and eventually develop my ear where I could hear somebody play something, including Chet Atkins, who I admired immensely, and learned to copy their style of playing. I was in several bands in my early years. One was called the Continentals that had a friend of mine named Stephen Stills in it, he and I are still good friends today, play together. He sang on my last CD with Crosby, Nash. And eventually I wound up working in a music store when it finally came to town. One of my guitar students was a guy named Tommy Petty, who I managed to teach him how to play basic guitar and worked with this band called the Epics for a while. My friend Bernie Leadon and I had a band called the Continentals, which later became a band called the Monty Quintet. And during the summers, we'd go over to Daytona Beach and play the dance clubs over there. And the Allman Brothers, which had a band called either the Allman Joys or the Spotlights or any name that they were playing under that week, we became friends. We were in battles of the bands together. They always won every battle of the band. They were the best band in the North Central Florida area there. Their mom lived in Daytona. So during the summer when we were out of school, we'd go over and play these clubs. And when they got off work and we got off work, we'd always go over to some diner and have breakfast at 2 in the morning or something. And then we wound up staying over at their mom's house and staying up till probably 3 or 4 in the morning. And Duane was sitting on the floor on his mom's living room playing slide guitar. And I said, you have to show me how to do that. So he sat down and showed me the basic tuning, the way he tuned the slide, and showed me all the basic fundamentals of how to pull down on notes and slide up to notes and certain thirds and fifths of the chord. And so my basic kind of introduction into slide guitar was from Duane, and I never tried to emulate him because I thought that was a futile effort, to tell you the truth. He was just an incredible slide guitar player, as everyone knows, but I really got my fundamental basics from watching him, being taught by him, and trying to take what he gave me and develop my own style. Duane, I understood, had listened to a lot of the old black acoustic slide players. And he started, since he didn't have an acoustic guitar, he started playing on electric guitar, and then when he figured out he could plug it in and turn it up and really get a lot of sustain out of it, he was off and running. He was the first guy that I ever saw play electric slide guitar, and I was just fascinated by it. It was just an unbelievable kind of thing. I don't know if he invented it or not, but he certainly became the iconic person of that instrument. A lot of the older blues guys would tune to an E chord, and then they would just put the slide down on it and slide it up and down on the neck of the guitar. But Duane took not only sliding the chords around, but he figured out the notes that he could slide and pull around on it as a single note solo approach to playing slide guitar. That's what was fantastic and phenomenal to me and unique, and really attracted me to his playing. I put together another band and moved to New York when I was 19. Made my first album by being discovered at the Fillmore East there by a record producer, hired us to make an album. But after living in New York for a year and a half, really struggling to make a living, I decided that being from Florida and having to go through 2 winters was enough for me. So I moved from there to Boston, and the record producer got me hooked up with 3 recording studios there in Boston. I worked in recording studios every day, doing jingles, producing, engineering, writing charts, playing guitar, everything I could do to learn how to make records. There was no opportunity to go to a school that would teach you how to make records, so you just had to learn on-the-job training. Eventually, my friend that was in my early band along with myself, who replaced Stephen Stills, was a guy named Bernie Leadon. And Bernie kept calling me and saying, "What are you doing in New York? You've got to move to LA. LA is where the music scene is." And so finally I wised up and took his advice and packed up my instruments, and I think I had $600 saved up at the time, and put a U-Haul on the back of my car and drove across country and showed up in LA. And Bernie was the only guy I knew there, and he was just leaving to go on the road with the Eagles' first record, I think, or second record, Desperado. So I wound up getting a job working with Crosby Nash, as a matter of fact, playing guitar with them, doing a lot of session work in LA, played with everybody from the Bee Gees on their records, Bob Seger. Finally got invited down to play on an Eagles album. Just play slide guitar on an Eagles record, went in and played slide guitar, and turned out being called the next day by Glenn Frey and asked me if I would like to join the band. And I said, of course I would. That's a great band. My buddy Bernie Leadon's in the band, and sure, I'm in. And so from there on, we started touring like maniacs and making records every year, which was really unusual to write that much material while working and being on the road, and started having a great deal of success, not only in kind of the classic country rock idiom, but primarily in the rock and roll area of writing songs and making records for AM radio. And that was kind of why I was brought into the band, was to put some rock and roll edge in the Eagles' music. When I started writing songs for the Eagles, I wanted to write things that Joe and I could play on. And I know Joe played talkbox, so I wrote a song for the Long Run record called Those Shoes that he and I could play a talkbox harmony on, which was something that hadn't been done before, but I thought it would be fun. But when I was writing for the Hotel California record, I wrote this track that I wanted to have something really kind of hard rock. The Eagles had never really played something that was just a harder rock and roll track, and Joe and I both have our roots in rock and blues. So I said, well, I'm going to write something. If it gets on the record, great, and if not, it doesn't. So I wrote this basic track and went on that same cassette that I mentioned before, and Don and Glenn and J.D. Souther really liked that track, which later became Victim of Love. Once we sat down and started writing the lyrics, I think J.D. said, you know, this song reminds me of something to do with a victim. And I went, oh, I like that. Victim is great. Victim of what? And then Henley said, Victim of Love. And so that was the title, and we started writing the rest of the lyrics and the choruses and stuff after that. Pretty much the melody that you hear in the verses is the same melody I had written that you hear in the opening guitar part. It's the same melody that's sung in the verses. And one of the things between instrumental and vocal that we tried to do was to recapitulate or restate things that hinted back at the melody, whether in the guitar parts that supported it or in the solos or things like that. So it was kind of a coherent theme that ran through the records.